All right, so I'll give a little introduction here. Good morning. I'm Jenny Thomas, Director of Library Services at Randolph Community College. Welcome to the North Carolina Community College Archives Association Professional Development Series Part 1 on oral history. This session will focus on pre-interview and research. Our presenter today is John Horan of the State Archives. I have a little background to give on him. And I also have some links that once I finish this introduction, I will share to show more of his previous work. John is the oral historian for the State Archives of North Carolina. He received a master's degree in history with a museum studies specialization from Cleveland State University. At Cleveland State, he began understanding the craft of oral history through the Center for Public History and Digital Humanities, where he spearheaded and consulted on several Cleveland regional oral history projects. He is also a PhD candidate in the field of public history from Arizona State University. While completing his coursework at Arizona State, John Horan honed his abilities as an oral historian through his work as the legislative oral historian for the State Archives, for the State Library Archives and Public Records of Arizona. In 2009, he created a commemorative oral history project for the 60th anniversary of Pittsburgh Theological Seminary. Currently, he lives in Raleigh and is working on several projects, including a project looking at school integration in the state of North Carolina and a COVID-19 government employee oral history project seeking to understand the professional and personal impact of the pandemic on state government employees in North Carolina. Okay, so thank you so much to John for being here today and for agreeing to do these two professional development sessions for us. We are very grateful. And like I said, I'll put some links into those projects that were mentioned in the biography. And yeah, I'm going to turn it over to John now.
Thanks, Jenny. Yeah, I also have some links and for some further research for the topics I'm going to discuss, and a sheet that I hand out to folks who are looking for thoughts on equipment and different microphones and whatever else that I'll also share with you to share with folks at the, we could do that afterwards or at the end or whatever you want to do. But in the meantime, as Jenny said, I am John Horan. I am the oral historian and amateur podcaster for the State Archives of North Carolina. I'm glad to be invited here to give this little talk, answer any questions you might have at the end. And so I appreciate the responses that I got to the survey that Jenny put out there. I see that there's a smattering of folks who at least have some experience with oral history. And over these two sessions, we'll explore 4 easy steps to creating oral history. And then at the end, as I said, we'll have questions and answers. We can get into the specifics of your project or more general look or whatever you want to do. But today, we'll look at how to think about interviews, how to craft it, technical considerations, all the kind of stuff that goes into developing projects. And then next month, we'll get into the business of actually conducting the interviews, and then how to preserve the interview once you are done. All right, but first, a plug for oral history. I know I'm sure I'm speaking to the choir here, but I thought I'd begin by speaking to some of the benefits of doing oral history. At the top, the interviewer is personally enriched by learning about a specific past from a very real person sitting right in front of them. Future generations profit by being rooted in the story of their ancestors. And then finally, one of the best outcomes of oral history comes to the individual and relatives being interviewed. By taking an interest in their stories, they feel their stories are valued, and the everyday becomes extraordinary. And then when starting an oral history project, I want to begin by thinking about the themes that we're going to explore, the people we want to talk to, and the questions we want answered. There's holes in every story, and so you hone in on those holes and you try to fill them. And then, of course, when you do that, you create more, and you just add and add and add, that to me is one of the most rewarding parts of oral history. Um, as I said, I have resources that I'll share about technology and a few articles on sample questions that we can do at the end. But when doing an oral history, certain themes may be obvious, but with a little bit of research and extra thinking, you can hone that focus and get that in-depth look for that specific history that, folks to come will be real thankful that you ask those questions that they can't. So I'd like to start here by sharing an excerpt from an oral history that I conducted with the former Secretary for the Department of Health and Human Services, Dr. Mandy Cohen. It was conducted in January for our COVID-19 Government Employee Oral History Project.
I was like, we're on our own, guys. Like I said that very early on. I was like, we are on our own. There's not gonna be a cadre of nurses that we can go get from another state, which is what we would do in a hurricane, right? Right. A hurricane would strike in North Carolina. We'd been through it before, and we'd reach back. We'd reach over to Illinois and be like, hey, Illinois, you didn't have a hurricane. Can you send us some nurses? Can you send us some ventilators? No, like everyone was on fire. Like everyone had a hurricane, right? At the same time. So I was learning the new process of like, oh, how do we get things from the national stockpile? And and oh my gosh, when they send things from the national stockpile, they're all expired and they're all degrading and they're falling apart. You take out your flu pandemic plan and you're like, oh my God, we've already outstripped everything in this plan. So, it was a lot of that. That was just like, it was a lot of, oh my God, and I want to say, we had a lot of things going for us in North Carolina, and hurricane and our preparedness because of hurricane was one of them. We had a terrific relationship with emergency management. So good. And it remains really, really good today. So they were tremendous, and they know how to respond to emergencies. Like they knew how to get like stuff from FEMA and blah 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 blah. Now the stuff we got wasn't good, and we had to go back to the drawing board. But like they knew how to like start the machine, which was really, really helpful.
So this discussion, I think today will center around doing audio only interviews, but you can see the value of doing a video interview if you have the resources and the storage space to kind of maintain it, because you can see when she talks about the pandemic plan, she does this and that hand motion signals something even more extra that just having the audio would not necessarily portray. But still, that's just a quick little plug for doing videos. So this is at the moment of the 50 or so oral histories that we've done, this is the first and only video that we have from these new projects that we've started since I've been on board. And so, and that was in 2020. So there's value in video, but at least capture the audio. And of course, she's discussing the pandemic plan and being prepared and the training gained through hurricane response. I'd like to take that sentiment and begin by talking about how every good project starts with a great plan. So talking to family members or individuals or other people you just meet off the cuff is great for informal events, but it could lead to a disjointed and difficult to follow oral history. Instead, I want you to think about the themes you might want to cover. So for example, a broad theme might be to look at your family's memories of the civil rights movement in the 1960s specifically. Think about the people in your family that that have the most to say about the themes you decided are important. In our example, you may have had family members that participated in a march. Be sure to know that. It'll be helpful later. You may have also had different perspectives based on generational lines. People who were in your family who might have already been adults in the 1960s might think differently than those who came of age at the same time. So, and then if you talk to the person who has the most, there's also a strategy of who you're going to talk to. If you talk to the person who has the most to say about something, it can give you information to talk to other folks about. But if you flip it, if you talk to people who you might say, well, they were kind of involved on the periphery, you might get a nice edge around the puzzle to when you talk to that person who has the most to say, you can fill in that big picture with all sorts of information around the sides. So there's multiple ways of doing it. I'm not sure that there's one best way, and I'm not sure that it always fits that way every project you get. You might have to just go as, take people as you go, but that's just something to think about. In the case of the Dr. Cohen interview, that project was for a part of history that's still very much being written. We've all experienced the COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, it's one of the reasons I'm doing this virtually, right? So we decided at the state that we want to capture the memory of the folks who work for the state and discuss how their jobs have changed as a result of the pandemic. Now, of course, this type of project has become popular across institutions, the state and beyond. Before I worked for the state, I worked for a different group over the summer, collecting 2020 summer, collecting oral histories and other documents and ephemera from people commemorating and preserving the memory of the pandemic. So I would be happy to talk about, setting up an interview program around talking to folks around their memories of the pandemic, if we want to get into that specific. But once you decide on what you want to talk about and who you think will have the most to say, write it all down, take notes, do general research on that history, and then decide, once again, if you want to do that audio only or video as well. So like I said, for our purposes, we'll be discussing audio only recordings. But another piece of information to think about is, how long do you want the interviews to be? I would say best practice is no shorter than 45 minutes, because if you don't get 45 minutes, you can't really get in depth on a piece, and it may be a little bit too surface level, may not have that information you want to get to. It takes me 20 minutes to get somebody comfortable talking to me. So once we get past that, you want to have some time. So 45 minutes, I would say, is a good minimum to shoot for. And then I would not go any longer than 2 hours in a single shot. Of course, you can have multiple interviews with the same person if you want, that, total up. We have interviews with one individual comes to mind that total up to 6 hours, but we did not do it in one sitting. Because once you get to 2 hours, people start getting tired. The person talking starts getting tired. The person asking the questions, active listening, they are really starting to get tired. So you would hate to miss something. Now, it's not 2 hours and turn off the mic, but if you see that you're nowhere near the end and you're getting close to 2 hours, it might be wise to kind of stop it and put it off till the next time. I'd also recommend staying consistent once you establish a time range. If you don't want some interviews in a particular project to be 45 minutes and others to be 2 hours, people might start wondering what's going on. It's of less importance, but it's something to consider. And then once you determine these key points, start reaching out to those individuals you identified. Talk to them about doing an interview. And here's where that research and clear vision comes in handy. When you call somebody in a pre-interview situation, you can tell them what the project is going to be like. You can tell them what you know about the subject. They can give you maybe a story or two. You make note of that story to come back to. You don't want to spend too much time on the pre-interview phone call and let too much come out, because then it either doesn't come out in the interview again because the person assumes you already know the story, or it comes out and it might feel a little bit canned, and a potential listener down the line might say, wait a minute, this doesn't sound anything like the cadence of the rest of the interview. What's going on? But still, you want to talk to them, give them an orientation about how they might expect the interview to go. I always call, people ask for specific questions. I tend to not want to give them that, mostly because I tend to not have I have a skeleton set for every project. But when I go into interview somebody specifically, I'll tailor it and I'll adjust it. So instead, what I'll do is I'll give them themes, and I'll do that in the phone call. I'll talk about, we have a school integration oral history project right now. And those themes are, what's the community like? What was growing up in your house like? What was the school district, that you went to? And then what was the school district that you integrated? These kinds of themes that we're going to explore. And then maybe we'll they'll ask a few questions. I'll give them a little bit more in depth on what I'm looking for in those themes. But that's how I present my interview structure to folks who I talk to. And then you get a sense of their specific story on that phone call, and you go back to your research, and then you tailor those questions. You look at the body of research, and you can kind of hone in. So in our example of 1960s and civil rights, what might work for your grandmother because she was an activist might not work for your aunt who was only a child at the time. You can't ask them the same questions. They won't get the same answers. So you have to be aware of the person you're talking to. And, and keeping with those 1960s, questions about Vietnam and the Vietnam War might arise. Individuals in your family who served might not want to speak of their service. There's a lot of that going on. You don't want to press it. But if they do, what they do or think or say about Vietnam might be quite different than folks who did not go. So tailor your approach and go into it knowing that you'll have to, this set of questions works for this person. And then it actually in the interview, it may not. And that's something we'll talk about next time, and how active listening is key. You might, I'll get ahead of myself, but I have an example of, I sat down with my questions that I've developed for this particular interview. I've been looking forward to it all day. I sit down, I open up the conversation. This person tells me a story, and now all of a sudden, all my questions I just put them aside. They're useful, but the avenue that this person has taken me down is far more interesting for the subject matter that we're trying to capture. That we're going down this, and if you're too in tune with your questions and not in tune enough with the person you're talking to, you might stick to the questions, as a crutch or as a strict guideline, and miss that wonderful story that the person wanted to share. But anyway, back to research. It's essential, but I do want to put a word of caution. Too much research can, if you're not careful, now be careful, it bias you away from authentic conversation. I used the word canned earlier. It can limit you from, not paying attention to alternative perspectives. It's the same as being too strict on your questions. But at the same time, not enough research could result in a lack of in-depth discussion. You want to strike that balance, and that balance is the fine art, I think, of conducting an oral history. It's where sort of the science and the rigor of academic history kind of becomes an art form, is trying to do this little dance with the person you're talking to in order to get that most in-depth and most beneficial story. But putting together the themes in the list of interviews, you want to talk about the research. That's 1/4 of the interview process, in my opinion, the planning stage. The next step, the pre-interview, includes looking into physical limitations, digital concerns, and organizing your thoughts directly before the interview takes place. So at this point, I want to say that 3/4 of the oral history process is not doing the oral history itself, the interview itself. That may be the most fun, at least it is for me. But in terms of time, you'll be spending far more greater time in prep and post than actually conducting the interview. As I said, you're talking about 45 minutes, maybe 2 hours of doing the interview, but you're prepping multiple hours. And then each interview, if you want to transcribe, which is best practice, that's multiple hours per hour of transcription. And that's even before you've decided how you want to exhibit it or how you're going to showcase it to the world. So all of this is to say that the pre-interview portion of conducting and creating oral histories is key. I want to look at the physical and digital considerations today, and then limitations about conducting oral history. So, let's take the thoughts and the themes and the tailored questions that we just mentioned from the planning stage, and then apply them to the interview. So you've determined who you're going to interview, the scope, and it's the time to begin that interview process. So I used to begin by talking about files and that sort of thing in these kinds of talks that I've given in the past. But at this point, because of the pandemic situation that we all know we're living in, as I mentioned, I start by saying, do you want to conduct this interview in person, or do you want to do it virtually? Everything has been done virtually for the last 2 years. Now numbers are starting to come down. So we at the state are starting to talk to folks in person again on a very limited basis in very specific situations, but we're starting to do it. The benefits of doing it in person are unmatched. There's except for in 2 specific instances, and that is distance can be a barrier to interviews. And in the past, if you have an interview that's 5 hours away, it becomes a logistical difficulty. It can be done, but it becomes a lot more work. However, online, you don't you can, I mean, we have folks today from the western part of the state. I'm in Raleigh. This is how the online space has kind of transcended that. So you don't have to travel to get somebody's story included into the record. And the second is obvious in the pandemic. Staying isolated, staying virtual means lowering your chance of being sick. Now, these two things are great. These two pieces are great, but virtual interviewing, it can overcome distance and sickness, but some folks are still uncomfortable with technology and would prefer to have things done face to face. So you don't want to let that be a barrier on the other side. There's definitely a certain digital barrier that people don't want to deal with. But whatever way you choose, and I'm happy to go into more depth on what we've done at the archives and all of that. But the main point is to make sure you can always see the person, even if you're only capturing the audio. If you only plan to save the audio and not to save the video, still have your camera on and insist that the person you're talking to have their camera on, because then you can kind of see the visual cues that they're giving you, and that'll give you a sense of how, in person it's obvious, but in this realm, that's why I don't advocate doing phone interviews, because you lose kind of the hand motions and the facial recognition of doing it through the camera if you do choose to do it virtually. But now, leaving that physical digital debate, that piece to one side, let's consider the format you'll be recording in. Everything's done digitally in terms of recording, and I have my handy little field recorder here. But we also use the computer to do it, which requires a couple of pieces of kit that we can talk about with more depth. But everything's done digitally. Born digital is the phrase, and there's no tapes or reel to reel or anything like that. So you're looking at basically two file types. There's WAVs and MP3s. I suspect you might be familiar with one or perhaps both, but I'll share which is best practice and why. Professional oral history work is to record your audio files in a lossless format. What that means is lossy compressed MP3 files, they tend to degrade over time. It's because it's compressed, there's less data points, and therefore when one data point falls off, it has more information in it to disappear. And so it can fade over time. A lossless file, an uncompressed lossless file, is less likely. I won't say it's going to sit there forever and be no problem, but it's less likely to degrade. And if it does degrade, since each little piece of data, each little point has fewer things associated with it, you don't lose as much of the big picture, if that makes sense. Now, the trade-off is that a lossless, uncompressed file is larger than an MP3 file, so it'll take up more space in a hard drive or a repository, and we can talk about that in the next meeting. But as I said, the acceptable archival standard in terms of audio file is the WAV format. They're uncompressed, and MP3s are compressed and run the risk of having a corrupted file, thus losing the interview in the long term. Another digital issue to consider is the range of audio you're capturing. If you can go into the settings of your device and make sure it's recording with three things in mind. Make sure it's recording in WAV, and then have it set to a minimum of 44.1 kilohertz and 16-bit depth. And more on those 2 points is preferred, but those are the minimums. And so the first number, 44.1 kilohertz, that represents the vocal range that's captured in the recording, right? So the larger that number is, the higher pitch and the lower the notes that will be recorded as the person is speaking. And then 16-bit depth represents how much data points per second that's captured. So it's 16 data points per second that's captured. Higher the values, the more space they'll occupy on the hard drive, but the better it'll sound, the less likely it'll fail over time. And I highly recommend 48 kilohertz and 32-bit if you can. So in addition to digital concerns, there's physical needs that can't be ignored in terms of equipment. The easiest way to make a recording, let me pull my phone out here, is to use something we all have, and that is a phone. Smartphones these days have recorder apps, voice memo functionality, records in the WAV format. Easy as opening up the app, hitting record, putting it down, and let's go. It's quite simple. It's convenient, but it's not as good in the fidelity, in the audio fidelity, as using a standalone microphone that is connected in an analog, old-fashioned way that will it'll do the best at rejecting side noise and all of that. So if you do want that high fidelity recording, or if you're planning on conducting several interviews, it might be worth it to look into getting external microphones, either to connect to your phone. They have little attachments that are quite nice, or a dedicated recording device. And like I said, I have an equipment guide that I've prepared and can share with everybody. So, I brought some items for show and tell. All of my stuff, there are several good USB mics that you just plug right into the computer, pull up a program, and it'll record. You can use open source software like Audacity to do that recording. But if you plan on doing more and in the field, you can do a dedicated voice recorder with XLR inputs. So I've got a little show and tell. Here's our little Shure SM58, and it's got these 3 pins, and that is it connects to a cord that looks like this. Hopefully I can't see myself, so I can't see what you see, but we can go over that again at the end. But anyway, and then, you plug it into the recorder on the side like that. And this is a company, Zoom makes this. It's not the same Zoom that we're sitting on today that everybody's grown to know and love over the last 2 years, but they have a good a range of recorders that are from quite affordable with 2 plugs to this one that has 4. And then there's some that even have 6 and beyond for using, recording music, not for oral history as much. But anyway, and then Tascam is another company that does good recorders. But they'll allow you to connect standard microphones, and there's a number of them. As I pointed out, the SM58. We also have this SE Electronics V7 or SE7, I should say, that's on my little mic stand here. And I have my Rode NT1 that I'm speaking into right now. But no matter if you go with the USB route or the XLR microphone, you got to choose a microphone that captures audio in a cariatoid or heart-shaped pattern. It's unidirectional, and it picks up everything in front of the mic and rejects things from the noise and the sides. So if you'll bear with me, I'm speaking directly into the microphone now, and I'm speaking to the back of the microphone here. You can see there's a major difference in how my voice is going as I come back to the front. So it's perfect for voice capture because you can set it right in front of the person and they'll talk right into it and it'll be great. But of course, using a microphone is not the only way to limit external noise. Room selection can be just as important. Room with soft surfaces and a table to set up your recording equipment is ideal. For example, dining rooms provide good options, as a good compromise. Tables at the right height. That's where I'm at right now because I'm working from home today. It's at the right height for desktop microphones or a smartphone. The seats are comfortable, but not so sleep-inducing as the recliner in the living room, and it's not as bad as the kitchen or bathroom with all sorts of hard reflective surfaces, appliances that have the uncanny ability to make their own noises and interrupt interviews. And that person's saying something so important, and then the ice maker starts, and you can't hear what they said. You don't want that, right? So you want to get rid of as many intrusive voices and noises as possible. And that includes letting other folks, if you're at somebody's home, letting other folks know that we would like this space for this much time uninterrupted, please. So, that's to let them know that maybe they shouldn't, come in and open this door and go into the cabinets and get a snack and have, turn on the TV. We want to have this space for this much time in as much quiet as we can get. But whatever hardware and room you use, once you hit record, and don't forget to hit record. I've never happened to me, fortunately, but I've heard a number of individuals who, sit down, do an interview, thought they hit record, didn't hit record, or did, stopped and forgot to hit it again, or didn't put in. This almost happened to me just this week. There's a little slot here on this recorder that a SD card goes into. I almost forgot to put the SD card in, which would have been a disaster. But anyway, so hit record and make sure it's going. Familiarize yourself with the equipment, but always begin with a prepared statement that explains what it is you're doing, who it is you're doing it with, and when that interview is taking place. Speaking of ambient noise, I don't know if you can hear the car going off on the side, but there you go. when the interview is taking place and where it is taking place. All of these points are essential at the beginning of the interview so that when a listener comes in, they are oriented to the context of where we're talking. It's particularly interesting. This example is really obvious when I talk about my COVID interviews. We started that interviewing people back in last March now, 2021. The stories that we got in March and April were sort of almost like a hopeless kind of like, we have many more months of this. And the stories we got in July, once the vaccine started taking off, before we got Delta, there was sort of a euphoria in the stories, like we're good to go. And then the stories we captured again in sort of September and then beyond, or sorry, September for Delta and then December for Omicron. There was a whole nother situation of you can hear it in the voice, you can hear it in the answers. And so to orient people at the beginning allows, you can make those connections as you listen to the whole segment. But anyway, so it allow people to have that context, and then it allow you to string several interviews together by time, theme, and physical space. And so here's a clip from another interview we conducted just at the beginning of this week, the one I almost missed, but I didn't miss. And this interview, he was interviewed for our military collection. His name is William or Bill Hess, and he served in World War II in the Navy, in the Pacific Theater. He had some great stories that I'd love to share, but I wanted to share this one clip. And he just had his 99th birthday a month ago yesterday, which you'll see is relevant.
Well, 2 years, and I remember vividly the day I got off the ship. Here I am in my office. I have my 2 storekeepers. Where the ship is in Norfolk at the time. I get orders to be detached. Finally, I'm getting off. I say goodbye to the 2 guys that I spent 2 years with. I walk out the door. I go to the gangway. The officer's deck is there. I go down the ladder to the ground. No band was playing. There was no activity. There was nothing. Just me walking away as if I was a casual pedestrian there at the time. And I got on a bus and went home. I mean, that was it. And I compare that now with all the hullabaloo I'm getting now. Here, you guys are sitting here. I have in my room, if you want to see me, I'll show you. I have 2 balloons that are about the size of that panel. Each one is a 99 in my room. I mean, where were you when we needed you?
Yeah, that's really interesting that there's no fanfare.
Oh, nothing. Fanfare. I just wish the 2 guys I spent 2 years with goodbye, wish them good luck, and that was that.
So now that we've heard about his fanfare, I'd like to open up to your fanfare. But in all seriousness, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have, and I want to thank you for your time.
If you want to put your questions in the chat, this is Peggy, you can do that, or you can unmute yourself and do it that way. I will monitor the chat and relay what anyone says.
Hi, John. I have a couple questions.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned heart-shaped pattern when you were going through can you explain more?
Yeah. I should have included an image, but there's a graph of sound wave that gets captured by different types of microphones, and so there's omnidirectional, which means it'll try to capture all around the microphone. It'll capture all around it. and then there's unidirectional, which only captures in one direction. And so when you have this set up like a micro, like you're speaking into it like this, the heart shape means it'll capture here, and then it'll come back down to a point, right? So that's the way that's what heart shape. It's not. It just means that the pattern in which the microphone captures starts from the microphone and goes out and comes like that. So if you're talking into it from this direction.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. I was just like,
Yeah, I don't know if so this is a heart-shaped this is a super heart-shaped microphone actually, so it's a really narrow. And so if you can hear, the way I talk about it, so then you can hear like here, kind of off axis, it's less. And then if I get behind it, can you hear the difference there? And then the way I come back, and so that's what the heart shape means. It just comes to a point. And maybe conical would be good too, to think about it. But anyway, yeah, there you go.
Great, thank you. Another question, you were talking about like when your interviews get a little bit long and you want to stop and take a break or come back for a second round of interviews, or however you want to refer to it. What's the best way to kind of stop and then pick up like without losing the momentum, basically?
Yeah, that's always a trick. That's why you got to have, either have somebody with you. I always recommend having two people, one person to run the stuff, one person to do the questions. And then that way, the person who's running the equipment can monitor all the levels, and then they can bring in their own perspective at the end. I always ask them to say, hey, do you have anything you want to add? But, and we can cover all of that and the answer to this in more depth next time. But you keep an eye on the time, right? So 2 hours is my cutoff. And so I'm looking at an hour, about hour 50, maybe, 45, 50, somewhere in there for the story. And if the story starts to trail, that's when I'll jump in and say, you know what, I want to be mindful of your time. We're getting close to 2 hours, or we just crossed 2 hours. I have several more questions, so I don't think we're going to be done soon. I'd like to, ask if you'd like to do a reschedule. And usually, almost, I think 100% of the time they say, yes, let's do that. And then, thank you. And we'll cut it off here. So then we stop it. And then, we'll schedule the next interview. And then the next time around, reintroduce it, say, this is for this project. This is, we're with this person for round two, for the second interview. It's this date, this time, whatever, this place. And, we left off talking about this. I had these follow-up questions. And so you ask your questions from there.
Okay. All right. I had another question, but I think it might be better for session 2.
Okay.
But, I'll just throw it out there. So I talk with my hands. When you were showing the video of Dr. Cohen, she was talking with her hands. You were talking with your hands.
I do.
If you're not keeping the recording, like you're doing a video, but you're not keeping it, or if you don't have that, and I know you've mentioned you have a second person, is that second person, are you asking them to kind of note motions? Like, is that important if you don't have a video?
You could. I don't. It would be difficult to marry that information with, because you couldn't put it in a transcript. There would be a space for it. You might be able to put it in notes that at minute 38, this person really got animated talking about something, and then that way you can give the cue to the listener that when they get to that point, there may be some lilts in the voice that accompany some real, and you could do it that way. And you could definitely ask for sure. I always ask the person next to me taking notes anyway. Ask them to take notes on, the kind of cadence of the interview, not to transcribe live because that's impossible, but to kind of note that, between these minutes we talked about something, and then between these minutes we talk about something else, and then, third thing and whatever. And so then that way, when it comes time to transcribe, the person's more aware of what's been said, so they can kind of anticipate a little bit, and it makes it a little easier. And it allows us to use that when we're giving it to folks to, because a transcription might not show up with the interview at the same time, but these notes would. So it makes it a little bit easier earlier for somebody to use it.
Okay.
And to ask that person then to say, hey, can you, kind of keep track of if the person really gets animated? I don't see that as a big ask.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, that was my last question. Thank you.
I actually have a question about, you talked about interviewing oral histories in your family versus the one that you just gave us, the demo, the gentleman who was 99 and he was a World War II veteran. Do you have a different way of approaching your own family, let's say, or advice on how to approach your own family versus someone who is not related to you, let's say?
Well, I have to say, I think I find it a little bit easier to talk to a stranger
Oh, yeah.
because there's a level of knowledge that your family presumes with you, and therefore they won't tell you the story.
Yeah.
It's not that they won't, it's just that it's psychological. Like if I've told you a story 10 times and you're asking me to record it on the 11th, I might leave out details because I know, but I'm not intentionally doing that. You've heard the story, right? And so
Right.
I'm not gonna kind of, but that being said, the basic tenets are the same. It's active, and we'll obviously get into it in the next session, but it's active listening is absolutely the key. I interviewed my grandmother. At the time she was, I think, 88, and she's 90 now, but at the time she was 88, and there were a ton of stories that she had told me, and she did just that thing. You have to be confident enough to say to be listening enough to say, hey, what about this other part? Play a little bit dumb, play a little bit fool. And then that way she came back and said, oh yeah. And so then we did this thing. And that's something you already knew, but you kind of have to get it back out. Right. And that happens more in family interviews than it does with strangers, because they're trying to tell you the story from scratch. So they're going to be a little bit all inclusive. But at the same time, strangers might want to withhold some stuff. So if you kind of develop a rapport, that's where it's easier to interview family, because you already have that built-in rapport. If you develop that rapport and get that comfort level to a certain point, you don't want to be too comfortable because you don't want them telling all kinds of secrets that gets everybody in trouble, right? Yeah, you got to keep an eye on that. But there's definitely a level of comfortability that you want to get to with the stranger so that they can tell you the story. And then again, the active listening is key. If you feel like they told you, they gave you the overview, the elevator's pitch of of that story that they just shared, you got to know where to ask the follow-up questions. And that's where it's easier to do in the family because you already know the story, whereas it's not as easy to do with the stranger because you don't know the story. And so you might ask a follow-up question that goes nowhere because you missed it. So there's the trade-off between the two.
Yeah. Too familiar or not familiar enough.
Exactly. It goes back to the art of having too much research and not having enough research. You have to know where the line is. And the best way to do that is to ask questions, active listen, and be open. You got to be open to, the other person wanting to tell their story. I mean, that's the thing. You're collaborating, but it's not a 50-50 collaboration. It's their story that you're getting out. So they have more into this. They have to have more into the story. And so you have to allow them the ability to drive. You're just navigating. So you're next to the pilot. You're not the pilot.
Good to know. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Jenny, I saw that you said you heard it and thought it was outside your window. What's that?
The car horn.
Oh, the horn. No, that was here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I apologize.
No, it's fine. It just showed how good your microphone is.
Well, now that you mentioned that, how do you deal with, I mean, you can't for every interview have the ideal soundproof booth. So how do you deal with ambient noise?
hmm Yeah, that's where so we use a virtual recording platform for our interviews that are done online, and that's called Riverside.fm. There are several that are out there. This is just the one we happen to use, and it actually was invented for podcasting folks and it was invented before the pandemic for people wanting to interview people for their podcast or radio show, but they don't have the budget to get them there, or they just can't travel. They're too busy, whatever the case may be. So we co-opted that because it produces the WAV file in a high bit rate and all of this stuff that I mentioned. It produces all that, where things like Zoom, Teams, WebEx doesn't do that. It's more focused on the video anyway. And so it doesn't have these high quality and short term, whereas this does long term high quality stuff. And so in that, there's a digital reader. I don't know. This is kind of an example, but you'll be able to see at least. So this is my
Right.
my mic's attached to this so that it's attached to the computer, and you can see this
Right.
blinking green light. It's not very precise, but on the computer program, it's a much more nuanced slider, and then on this little screen here will give you a very clear idea, and you want to keep it in the green and outside of the yellow, and definitely not in the red, so because it'll get clipped. And so the way to, if you're in a not ideal situation, the way to kind of do it is to tune down a little bit the audio, and then in post-production kind of boost the volume. That generally allows you to overcome any bad noise, generally speaking. Other than that, you're going to need to, that's beyond my experience, as I'm not a sound engineer. So there's, I'm sure, tricks and tips that they would have on that. But I find if I turn it down a little bit and then put it in the computer and then boost the volume from the computer, it allows me to overcome maybe an echoey room, or but if there's just some small noise that occurs, there's software out there that allows you to isolate that small noise and just take it out. So those are the.
Would you be willing to send us a list of some of the programs that you're using, that sort of thing? That would be very helpful.
Absolutely, yeah. Actually the list that I have for the equipment includes at the bottom 2 digital audio workstations, is what I think they're called, and the one is called Audacity, which is free and open source.
Right.
It's confusing, I find, but it's actually pretty good once you get past that initial learning curve. The other one that we use is called Audition. That's the one I use on the regularly, and that's an Adobe product, and which requires a subscription.
Right.
But if you're doing a lot of these, there's value in it, because, and forgive me if this is too technical, but in Audacity, you get a wave, which is, as somebody speaks, they speak in waves, and so you get that wave, and you can kind of manipulate the wave. In Audition, the Adobe product, you get the wave and you get what they call a heat map. And so the heat map, you can see with more clarity. If a phone rings in the background, it'll be a squiggle line through in a different pitch range than the voice. So you can isolate that little squiggle and take it out without affecting the voice.
In other words, there's more ability for post-production cleanup then.
Absolutely. I wouldn't recommend too much of that, because then, you could start compromising the integrity of the interview.
Yeah.
And so I would, caution, definitely. But if there's just like the phone rings at one small point, particularly if, as the interviewer, you say, hey, hold on a second, let's let's just let this ring through. Taking that out would not be too much of a question. Yeah, so just kind of keep aware. There's all kinds of little tips and tricks online too about how to isolate certain noises and pull them out, leaving the rest of it. And then that's what the other person's there for. They'll have their headphones on and they'll be able to adjust the volumes, and so they can kind of hear, okay, there's a little buzz in this mic, but not in this one because this one is set to the right volume and this one's set too high. Or I can barely hear this person, so I need to turn it up a little bit. And that's what the other person's there for. But if you're doing it remotely, I would recommend, and you know, as the interviewer, you can't control what the narrator does, but as the interviewer, I would recommend setting up shop in a place that's if you don't have like a super focused microphone, setting up shop in a like a linen closet is probably the best way to go because it's just so quiet in there.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else? That's a lot of good information, John. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely welcome. And as I said at the top, we're doing a podcast too, and so take a look. I'll plug it. It's called Connecting the Docs. But at the same time, we also are doing that and would be interested in talking with folks who maybe already started theirs or want to get started on and share some ideas on that. If we
Is
wanna do
that
too.
available from the state library or the state archives? Does it have a link there?
The Connecting the Docs is available through the state archives, but
Okay.
so you can get it on our blog, History for I think it's History for All the People or History for the People. I'm not sure if all is in there or not, but anyway, you can find it if you go to Apple Podcasts, or if you just Google Connecting the Docs podcast, you'll find it. It's
Okay.
right up top. So I'd recommend listening to that. Jenny found it and
She's
has
good.
put it in the. Thank you.
Welcome.
But I'd be happy to hear what other people are doing, if they're doing anything, and if they want to get started, I'd be happy to share that information as well. But yeah, we're and then this is something we'll talk about definitely next time. But if you have oral history projects and you're concerned about where you want to store them, we would like to partner, and you could then store them in the archives at the state.
That's fantastic. Okay, well, I think we've got like 5 minutes, so last call for questions. All right. Well, then I say we wrap it up, and thank you so much, John. This was very informative, and I can't wait for the second one. And yeah, I guess we'll see you then.
Yeah, absolutely. The second one is going to be even more fun because it's actually interviewing, and if you're an
Yeah.
extrovert like me, it's great because then you get to talk to people all day. So that's where I like to live. So anyway, yeah, you're quite welcome. I look forward to it next month, and enjoy the day.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.